The first experience, and it was sort of like eye-opening reality check, was when I was working at Philips TV and I made a 3D user interface. There were a couple of things, assumptions that I had proven. And then the managing director asked me, why would I invest in this? Like, what's the return on investment going to be? And I was like, I do not have an answer for this.
Welcome to All Things Design, the podcast where I speak to top design leaders about how design drives digital transformations. I'm Joe Woodham, founder of Tory, Australia's leading design consultancy. We work with top brands to embed amazing designers into their teams. Our designers create experiences that millions of people use every day. Today, I'm speaking with Principal Service Designer at IAG, Glenn Veugen. He spent years helping companies balance user needs with business goals, turning design thinking into measurable ROI. I'm keen to find out how and why you became a designer.
It's a bit of a weird one. My passion for design started with special effects and 3D modeling. So when I was in my teens, I was exploring apps like Maya and 3D Max. And I thought this is really fun to just play around with, mess around with. And I thought I could make a career from it. So talking to my cousin who has an ad agency, he does a lot of video editing for ads. He was also lecturing at a university. And my idea was to just take a job as a postie or something and then spend the rest of my free time learning, teaching myself how to do 3D modeling. He taught me out of it. He said, like, go to uni, you'll also build a network and whatnot. And that's sort of where I started to really get into design. I was still doubting between visual design and development, web development. I was pretty good at web development and coding in general, scripting and coding, but I also still wanted to do the visual stuff, even though I wasn't super talented or artistically inclined. And then in my first year of uni, one of the lecturers took us to a usability study. And that's where I got in touch with the usability side of things and the why side of design. So all the psychological aspects that come into play with design and actually the things that drive human behavior, that world opened up to me. And that's how I ventured into where I am now.
If you're enjoying today's video, please make sure you hit subscribe and give us a like so other people like yourself can find the video and get some value from it. Beautiful. Are you enjoying the change? Do you think it was the right decision in the end?
It was super interesting. Yeah, it was. I think I've always had this inclination to challenge things, to figure out why things are working the way they are. And that's also how I sort of progressed through my career. So obviously as a junior and even a mid designer, you are more on the tools and you basically hear from other people what you need to do and what needs to be done. But I've always been wondering why we're doing things. So question like, what's the added value to the user? And especially in the early years in your career, you still focus on like what's good for the consumer, what's good for the end user, because those are the people that you design for. But gradually, you also start wondering about how business works and how you bring those two sort of goals together. So yeah, definitely the right decision.
It's a pretty good segue into the topic, right? Design ROI. Like, how do you align design teams? Because like designers essentially are very user focused, but the business is what you're designing for in the end of the day. So how do you, I guess, bring the designers and align them with the business objectives at the end of the day?
It starts with realizing how the world works and how business works. If we look at our own careers, yes, NPS is good. Yes, CSAT is good, but we don't get paid in NPS numbers and in CSAT numbers. Like, it's all about the hard dollars. That's the value exchange between a company, a business, and a customer. So the reason why companies exist is to provide a value exchange. The value that a company receives is usually the money. The value that a customer receives is whatever the company has to offer, like whether it's a product or a service. So starting with understanding what that value exchange is, that allows you to more effectively design good outcomes for both the end users, the customers, and meet the goals of the business.
Okay, so let's go on that journey, because obviously you spoke about being a junior or mid. You are kind of really focused on the user, and you kind of, to a degree, told this is what you need to be focusing on, this is how you need to do it. What was your journey going from that to being inquisitive and going, how do I learn and understand the business side to add more value?
Gotta start. I've always been interested in business and how to run a business. My mom was a business owner, so I've always had a bit of visibility on what people have to do to effectively run a business. There are lots of mistakes that people can learn from. Being self-employed, a freelancer consultant, you see the admin side of things of running a business, even though it's a one-person business, it's a sole trader, but you know that there's a lot that you need to look into. It's not just your craft, but all the admin around it. And I think what really helped me, even though it was at a later stage in my career, is to learn about investing. So when you learn about investing, value investing mostly, you really get a good view on what makes a business tick or what makes a business a good business. And if you look at what we do as designers, especially in customer experience and designing good outcomes for business, and what the aspects are on which a business is being assessed, they're really, really related. So as a designer, you can have a lot of impact on the fundamentals of a business, and you can have a lot of impact on what makes a business a good business or what differentiates a business from their competitors. So seeing like how those two are intertwined and how they can impact each other, that was really the moment for me that opened my eyes and said, this is also the language that we need to speak. Like, this is what we need to do. This is how we can contribute. And this is showing me that there is not really a conflict between the two, but a synergy.
I agree, but let's jump into the language. So designers have their own language and how they talk about approaching the user and building designs or making things. But then when it comes to communicating that back to stakeholders or the business, sometimes that communication isn't quite where it needs to be. What was your journey in terms of learning that business talk to a degree to I guess bring that together?
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, everyone speaks their own language, even in business, in a company. There's even different dialects being used between designers, between marketeers and designers, between customer experience and user experience, technology. So it's not just a they versus us, a business versus design, but even like internally, like within the subject matter domains. I guess trying to understand is the key. So at least from what I've seen and the way, like the places that I've been, designers have always tried to explain to business stakeholders like what they meant. So it was more like a push to the business stakeholders, like what the language was, use that language and try to get them to understand, which is fair. Like, you need to help people understand, but it works both ways. So you also have to put an effort to understand what they want and what their objectives are and how their objectives align. So what really helped me is understand why certain business decisions are being made. Because sometimes decisions are being made by the so-called business people that seem really counterintuitive. But if you actually start understanding or start investigating, start being curious about why certain decisions are made and how they contribute to business goals, you actually start understanding why those decisions are made. You actually see the rationale behind it. And I think in any sort of domain, rationale is key. In design, we talk a lot about design rationale, like why we place a button there and not there, for example. Same goes in business. So showing that empathy, showing that curiosity to understand what the rationale is a key thing, because then your world just opens.
And what are the sorts of things that you do to understand that rationale? Like, how do you educate yourself so you are understanding why they're making the certain decisions and then sort of feeding that back into how the work's being done or how it's being communicated back to designers?
It starts with asking questions. It starts with curiosity. Generally listening to rationale is a key thing. Trying to understand. You may not understand the inner workings of, for example, I work in insurance. I don't really understand how pricing is being established, like how the prices of an insurance policy are being set. But I know that there is a rationale behind it, that there are really advanced algorithms doing that work and really smart people setting the prices, like defining the algorithms to set the prices. I don't really know, but I know that there is a rationale behind it. Also respecting that there are smart people who really think about it. That's the first step. So to translate that back to design teams, it's trying to link, and it goes both ways actually. They're trying to link business outcomes to user outcomes and user outcomes to business outcomes, which is not always very straightforward. And that's where if we talk about languages, is it using a pidgin language sort of, or a dialect that you need to understand? It takes a bit of time, but it's showing interest in the other domains. basically. So appreciating and understanding what makes a business tick on a fundamental level. Obviously, you don't have to go into the weeds, but you're trying to explain what the workings are of a business and why certain things happen.
Yep. So once you sort of understand business objectives and why they're making certain decisions, how do you prove the value of design and certain decisions being made from a design perspective back to the business so they understand the return on investment, why you need money to do certain things, or why you need to place that button here, or why you need to go do some user research? Like, how do you link those two back so they also understand what you're doing and the value of design?
Translating it to the language that they understand. And the language that they understand is finance. That can be really, really complicated, but it doesn't have to be. In the end, a dollar is a dollar, or whatever currency you want to use. But not everything that you do in design can be traced back to a direct dollar result. But there are also indirect dollar results. If you think about placing a button somewhere, why are you doing that? I think that's the first question that you have to ask yourself. What does that actually lead to? Do you want to do it because you think that that's going to increase conversion or something, or it's going to make it easier for a customer to go through a flow? Well, what's the impact of that? It's going to be more sales, allegedly. It's going to be more items added to a shopping cart. It's going to be higher insurance policies or more options that are being added. What does that lead to? More products being sold, more revenue being generated. So if you start thinking about your own rationale, we're all doing things for a reason, and that is to do better for the company. Unless you work for an NGO, but in general, we all do things to help contribute to the performance of a company. So making that translation starts with first asking yourself why you're doing it. If things are easier to use for a user, if you're trying to increase the usability or even the visual appeal, well, why do you do that? You do that because you want to make things more appealing, more easier for the user to use that service that they are actually hiring the company for, or coming to you for, rather than your competitor. Thinking about that as a designer yourself, the reason why you're doing certain things and trying to link that back to business performance or business rationale, so to say, that helps. If you go to a certain company, let's call it like a coffee shop, or let's call it Apple versus Microsoft. Like, why would someone go to Apple versus Microsoft? Well, there are reasons. There's a certain appeal to Apple or Microsoft. If you focus on design and usability and those kind of things, you sort of amplify that reason for the customer to choose your brand. I think that's a really good angle for designers to use. How am I amplifying the things that appeal to the customer?
It's a pretty good analogy, right? Like, I use Apple. They're great products. They look good, but a phone's a phone, right? If I need to call someone, it doesn't matter if I've got an iPhone or a Nokia, if they still exist.
Same thing, right?
But one is more user-friendly. One is prettier to look at. One just operates in the way that I need it to operate. So I choose that. So it's brand loyalty that sort of comes off the back of that design element, which is a pretty good way of thinking. How are you sort of making sure that you are taking the business on that journey of like, yes, we are moving this button to here, and this will increase the shopping cart value or the people sort of getting through and going through checkout? Like, how do you communicate that back to the business in their language, not just from a financial perspective, but like in the way that they need to hear it, so they understand, all right, this is why we need to invest the time up front to do the service design piece, because at the end of the day, we're going to build something and it's going to be costly. Like, how do you take them on that journey?
The key is taking them on that journey. So as designers, and depends on the type of designer that you are, but in my case, service designer, strategic service designer, I think our role is to facilitate. So if I try to convince you of something, there might be a bit of resistance. There might be a lot of acceptance and a lot of leeway and whatnot. But if you go on a journey with the business stakeholders together, you use empathy, tactical empathy, to understand what they want and deploy that same sort of empathy and language to help them understand what a user actually tries to accomplish. You come to common ground. You'll see that it doesn't matter what area of the business you're working from, you can come to a lot of common ground if you just use that tactical empathy to understand why you're actually doing things. Taking designers on that not business stakeholders on that journey, but also designers actually. It's about taking them on the journey. Like you need to include everyone in the process. And yes, it might take a bit longer, but at least you will have that dialogue going on and you will come to the same conclusion. Hopefully at some point you'll reach the same conclusion that what you're putting your money towards is worth doing. It's far easier to build the argument with someone than to try to convince them that something is right, because they don't have any ownership in the decision. So it's really about taking them on the process, taking them on the journey.
Yep. Now, not every company has service design as a part of their design team, right? Let's say if you're a smaller company, you might have product designers, you might be lucky to have a researcher. If you're explaining what service design is, like how would you explain to like a business owner that doesn't understand the value of service design? How would you explain what you do and the benefit of having service design at the right time?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Service design helps bring the customer's perspective to the organization. So, like I said, a customer engages with the business because they are wanting to have a need met. They are looking, it's usually a very transactional thing. Sometimes there's a bit of an emotional layer, but usually you go to Bunnings because you want to buy something, because you want to do something else. What that else is, and the reason why a customer chooses your company, your brand, that is something that service design can help business, just the business in general, with understand like what that customer context is from a holistic point of view, and then also help identify how you sort of make true on that promise or on that appeal of a company. So again, if we talk about the whole Apple thing, the reason why people choose Apple is frankly pretty emotional because they have that association with a brand. Again, I have a lot of Apple products myself, apart from my phone. That's an Android somehow. But the whole reason is, is it the best hardware? I don't know. You could argue about that, but there is just that appeal, that loyalty. So understanding that context, like who is your customer and why do they actually choose your brand or the service that you offer? What does that appeal to those customers? That's what service designers brings surfaces, and that's what they also help amplify. That's what they help sort of like play into.
And like, I guess investing in service design, how does that feed back onto the rest of design? Like if you just started trying to build something and you didn't have the right design process in place, I think 70% of projects that don't like are tech-led don't work out that they ideally should, right? So if you were investing in service design or the right design process up front, like what does that mean for a business to be able to go out and understand why their customer is engaging with their product before they potentially build something or start a new venture?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'm going to use a very, very, very insurance-y term. It's de-risking. It's just de-risking the investments. So it helps. Investing in service design helps you fund the right things. We're not always going to get it right. Obviously, we can't look into the future. If I could look into the future, I would be doing something completely different than service design. I would probably be sipping cocktails on an island, but that's not the case. But we do help de-risk certain investments. So if you as a business want to build something from scratch and you want to build a fully fledged product or service offering without knowing that there is even demand for it, desirability, that's a big risk. And that's another big risk that a lot of people are willing to take with their own money. So why should people take that risk with someone else's money, with business money? So investing in the right process, but engaging with design practitioners who are focusing more on the strategic and the research, trying to link the business objectives with the customer objectives, helps de-risk certain investment, and it helps you focus a bit more on what the customer actually wants and how customers want to engage with your business. So it just gives you a bit more of a sense check of what is actually desirable in the market.
I love it. And I think doing this podcast, I speak to so many designers, and it is talking about investing in design upfront to do that discovery and research phase to de-risk a project, essentially. Like if you go out and you build a product team, you've got 5 developers and a product manager trying to build something, but they haven't done the initial research. They get to a point, they go, shit, has this got product market fit, or do we have to go back and do this now? Which means you've got a whole team that has to kind of go to standstill while you're going back and doing something that you could have done before you got to that point. It's
Exactly.
interesting. And like, yeah, once again, going back to your investment terms, right? Like if you invested in the right things at the right time, you're going to get a way better outcome. And that's what design is. It's investing at the right point in time. So how are you like taking your team on that journey or taking other designers? Because you are right, like when a junior or a mid-level designer joins an organization, they're not necessarily thinking about how do what they do on a day-to-day basis impact the business and increase the return on investment of the time spent. They're kind of thinking about how do I impact the user? How do I make this a really good user experience? Like, how do you take someone on that journey to educate them that like it's great that we do have to like we are here to serve the user, but that has to obviously have a transition, a value back to the business.
I think the key, like a really important skill set of any designer is the ability to ask questions. Asking the right questions, you'll identify the right questions, although it's hard to know in advance what the right questions are, but being really open. So in design language, we love using terms like divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking doesn't only apply on solutions and ideas, it also applies to the questions that you need to ask. An exercise like assumption mapping is therefore really useful. If you do assumption mapping on DVF, for example, desirability, viability, feasibility, obviously as designers, we think that we're responsible for desirability, and that is true. But it's not just desirability. If you venture into the questions around, well, why would this be a good idea? Why would this be worth investing? You start asking yourself the questions, and they may not all be very relevant, or even you don't need to find the answers on certain assumptions, but just identifying them is a really good way. The first experience, and was sort of like eye-opening reality check, was when I was working at Philips TV, and I made a 3D user interface. So 3D TVs were the hype of that era, I'd say. As part of a project, I was trying to make a 3D user interface, and it looked fairly good. The technology was there. There were a couple of assumptions that I had proven. And then the managing director asked me, why would I invest in this? Like, what's the return on investment going to be? And I was like, I do not have an answer for this. Like, it looks nice, it looks appealing, but is it going to be a real value add? I don't know. With the current state of 3D TVs, I think we have received a conclusive answer that it was never going to be a value add. And that's sort of when it becomes real. If you had to invest time and money into this initiative, into animations, for example, that's something that designers really love focusing on. And I agree, it does have an impact, but is it enough? Is it going to make a difference to a customer, to a user, to choose between your brand and your competitor's brand? The key is just asking yourself the questions and being open to those questions, and also like daring to ask the questions. That is the thing. We don't want to put our heads in the sand. We really want to be open and curious to even the questions that we rather not have the answers to. So that's usually the journey that I take juniors and mids on. Start asking the questions. Start asking yourself. Start asking other people the questions. Even like, is this a good idea to invest in? That's sort of like where it starts, and that's how you start learning.
I love it. And you come back to that investing analogy quite a few times, but as a business owner, that's how I look at everything, right? Like, is this worth investing in? What's the outcome? But how do you take people that don't necessarily understand that side of things on that journey? Like, let's say they're quite frugal with their money. How do you take them on that journey? It's like, this isn't just about you building something for the sake of building something because you want to put your name to it. Like, it has to have dollar cents back to the business. It has to obviously impact the user in a positive way. Like, how do you really build that right line of questioning so they are questioning it in a way that's not necessarily based on how they were brought up or what they think? It's kind of what the business needs and what the user needs.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I have the answer on that, or at least not a conclusive answer. I think a really good question is, how do you justify your job with this company by doing this? Does doing this justify your job? Like, would you pay yourself to do this for my business? Because I think role playing is a good one. Like, if you're a business owner or if you sort of associate it with an expense, like what it costs that you have to bear. So like putting yourself in someone's shoes, like using that empathy muscle again, like that really helps. So I think it is a really good start. What I've used in the past, but not that often, I admit, is by trying to put aspiring and starting designers in the place of the person who actually has to cough up the funds to invest in something. Like really, I think like a key question is, would you pay someone like yourself to do this for your business? That makes it real.
Yep. Good point. It does make it a lot more real if you've got to fork out someone else's salary, right? And it's going back to, I think, look, I understand the value of design. I love design, but why should leadership prioritize design? I think we've kind of alluded to the answer a few times, but talk me through like why you think leaders should be investing in design at the right time.
Should they invest in design? Is design exclusively responsible for what makes a company a great company? I think investing in customer centricity is the thing that leaders should invest in. And that's probably where we as designers can contribute. We're also not really doing ourselves any favors with how we present ourselves. Design is a very confusing term. There is definitely an association with just pushing pixels and whatnot, but design goes much further than that. If you look at the outside world, you build things that solve problems. An industrial designer or civil designer, construction designer, designs bridges because there is a gap that needs to be crossed and you design a shortcut. It's helping design solve for something. That's what we need to do as a design community. We need to present ourselves a bit better. The thing that we bring to value is customer centricity. So we shouldn't be asking design leaders to invest in design because anyone can do design. Design leaders should be focusing in customer centricity because in the end, that is the reason why your business exists, most business, because you offer something that serves a need to a customer who is willing to pay for it. Investing in customer centricity helps you deliver better on that. It helps improve your performance as a business. It makes you more relevant in that transaction because in the end, it's all about a transaction. And some transactions have, like I said before, a more emotional load or an emotional bond. Some transactions, some interactions with the company are really, really just transactional. I work in an industry that is at the moment still very, very transactional. You get insurance because you want to get peace of mind. If something happens to your asset, you expect that the claim is being paid out. But that's sort of like a very transactional thing. Other than that, you don't really think about your insurances that you have. Even though you should, that's another story. But as leaders should invest in customer centricity, in investing in customer experience. And there is hard and tangible evidence that actually pays off. Investing in customer centricity and in customer experience does have positive impact on business performance, which can be measured in hard dollars. So as designers, we need to bring that language and those facts more to the foreground. Those facts and numbers are readily available. Forrester, for example, is very, very focused on making that connection, like the return of investment on design. We have to come into the room armed with those facts, like, hey, this is why you should invest in customer centricity.
I actually had a conversation this week with another service designer about having design in their title. Sometimes they don't get taken seriously because people do think they're pushing pixels, where it's not necessarily about that in certain parts of the design process. Like if you said you're a researcher or a designer or you're a design researcher, right? They're much the same, but you get different levels of respect because you say you're a researcher as opposed to a designer. But going back to it, I've actually recently been writing a white paper on how important design is in the process, and it comes back to customer centricity. Like anyone that's tech-led and tries to do like a digital transformation, like 70% of digital transformations don't meet user needs. Whereas if they're design-led, I think it's like the opposite. 70% of design-led digital transformations meet user needs. So it's quite fascinating how the roles very much reversed if it's focused on the user from the start. So using service design and user research to feed the strategy and vision through the process, as opposed to got some great tech, let's implement it and see what happens. But I think very common story, arming designers with the right sort of arsenal to go into a room and go, hey, we could do a project this way, but these are your risks. But if we put design at the front of the process, you're de-risking a lot of that, which think it's just that communication piece. It goes back to the right language. So like, is that the missing piece? Is the designers maybe need a little bit more education on how to communicate the right way to get the business on board?
Probably. And maybe also a bit more flexibility in how we operate. If we stick to the processes that we've been taught at school, in our education, by our peers, by our seniors, then yes, design is always going to appear in front of delivery. But if we know how to adapt those processes, then we can also be in the delivery stage, or when features are being built or when services are being built, then we can start adding value there. So you're right when you say that a lot of technical solution-driven initiatives don't necessarily meet customer needs. They probably meet business needs in a way. So when you were talking about the design-driven things, like, don't usually meet 70% of business needs. So this
No, it's the opposite. So
we need to be able to apply our practices and our approaches and our methodologies. We need to be flexible with them. Like, we can't be stuck in our double or triple diamonds. We need to take elements from them and try to apply them in the right place. Because even if something fails, it can be an expensive mistake, but it's only a mistake if you let it be a mistake. If what we as designers can bring in a process is the opportunity to learn. Hey, we just did something. You establish a reason why you're doing something, why you think something is going to be successful. All right, let's track that. Let's see if that actually holds ground. If this feature is going to generate more users, more clicks, whatever, let's measure that. And let's see how that stacks up against business performance or against something else. If that doesn't work, that means that the assumption was wrong, but that's a learning that you have. So what we can do as designers to establish ourselves more and build our credibility is also just think along with our business partners, because we don't know everything. We know just as much and just as little as the rest of the organization. We're not the know-it-alls, obviously, but we can bring a certain way of thinking and approaching things, using just looking at things as an opportunity rather than a problem, in the sense that we didn't do customer research. We don't have a lot of, we're not too certain or too confident that this is the right thing. Well, sometimes you just need to try things. Sometimes you need to deploy something in markets and just make sure that you are learning something. So defining your learning outcomes, that can also build confidence in the fact that you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. But that's also a learning. So it goes both ways. We can't be too rigid. And I noticed that designers are becoming more and more flexible, adopting and applying those practices. But yeah, sometimes you just gotta put things in the market and just help guide the team to make the right decisions once it is in the market, and make sure that they learn the right things. I think that's a really key skill for designers as well.
I think it needs to be a key skill for everyone, right? It's like making sure if something doesn't work, you're learning from it. That it's not a failure unless you don't take anything away from it. And go back to this investing strategy. It's only a realized loss if you, I guess, take your money out and run away, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Sort of sit back and look at what happened and why it happened, and then work out how to make it not happening in the future, or learn from it and do something better. Fascinating. Yeah. Glenn, it's been a lot of fun having a chat. I think this was an enjoyable conversation. So thank you very much for jumping on. If anyone wants to connect with you directly, best way to reach out to you via LinkedIn?
That's correct. LinkedIn is the place to be.
Amazing. Once again, that was a very fun conversation. So thanks for jumping on.
I enjoyed this very much, Joe. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's episode. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you hit subscribe. Also, leave us a comment and a like. It helps people like yourself find this video.